Okay. What chapter are we on?
13.
13. Very good. What happened in chapter 12? What did we introduce in chapter 12? Beinoni. Very good. Mazel tov, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, in chapter 12 we introduced the Beinoni. And we're going to continue to discuss the Beinoni. The Beinoni, after all, is the main character of this book, Sefer Shel Beinonim. So without further ado, let's just get into chapter 13. Perek Yud Gimel. Uvezeh yuvan loshen maimer zal beinim zeh v'zeh sheiftan pirush yetzer tov v'yetzer hara. Now we can understand something that we mentioned in chapter 1. Way back in chapter 1 when we were throwing out these terms tzaddik, rasha, beinoni without even really knowing yet what they meant. We mentioned the Gemara that says Beinonim zeh v'zeh sheiftan. A sheifet is a judge. Beinonim have two judges, the yetzer hara and the yetzer tov. Yetzer tov, yetzer hara. You ever seen in the cartoons when the Donald Duck will have the little devil on the shoulder and the little angel on the shoulder? Okay?
Yes.
Exactly. Dichsiv, like it says, Ki yamed liminav yain le'shia meshefte nafshay. He stands on the right of the pauper to save him from those who would condemn his soul. It doesn't say that he has two rulers, it says he has two judges. What's the difference between a shofet and the meishel? A judge and a ruler and a judge? Because if he would have two rulers, even if one of the rulers only got to rule for a brief second, Nikra Rasha Ba'isashah, then he would be a Rasha for that moment, even if it's a moment when he allowed the yetzer hara to be a ruler. So the yetzer hara is not a ruler in the case of the Beinoni. Ella, rather, ha-yetzer hara einay rak al derech mashal kemei shefet v'dainay medaite b'mishpat. He's just a judge who says his opinion, like a panel of judges, like a Supreme Court, where you do have a dissenting opinion. So he's not, the yetzer hara in the Beinoni is not a moshel, not even for a second. If he would be a moshel, if he would be able to take over and take the wheel and be the one directing the expression of the three garments of the soul, any one of those garments, for however brief a moment, if that were to happen, he wouldn't be a Beinoni. This person would not be a Beinoni, he'd be a Rasha. However, that's not what happens. That's not what happens. The yetzer hara does not moshel, it's not leading, controlling, carrying anything out. No. Oh, so he doesn't have a yetzer hara. I didn't say that either. Then he would be a tzaddik. He has a yetzer hara, but its function, rather than being a moshel, is that of a shofet, a deyazager, someone who says his opinion. So everyone's entitled to their opinion, and that's really the condition of the Beinoni. He has a yetzer hara that is giving its opinion. He's like a keyboard warrior. You know, the people online who like to give shocking hot takes on every issue, trying to troll you. That's basically the yetzer hara in a Beinoni. He likes to say his shocking, ridiculous ideas, and you can't block him.
It's like shrugged off.
Yeah, you just feel, okay, that's him again. Very cute. Yeah, go, all right, yeah. You can't block him. You can't make him, if you could block him, you'd be a tzaddik. But no, you're going to see his ridiculous comments, and you just got to shrug him off and not let him actually take control, even for a second. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe says here, so the yetzer hara in the Beinoni never gets a chance to be moshel, he never gets a chance to rule, he only gets to say his deya. V'afal pi kein yochel yesh lo yeh psak halacha kach l'maaseh, Mipnei sheyesh oid shefa v'dayin hachoylek olav. Even though the yetzer hara is vociferously stating his opinion, let him say his opinion. Let him say it as freedom of speech. Say it as loud as you want, man. But that's just your opinion. So he doesn't have to be the one who gets his way, because there's another judge. Who's the other judge? Yetzer tov, who's going to come and say, but I also got an opinion. Oh, so now we got a, what do you call it, stalemate? The yetzer hara's got an opinion. Yetzer tov's got an opinion. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? You know about the guy, first night after the chuppah, he says, you know what, tomorrow morning is my first day as a married man, my new life. I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and go to kollel. I'm not going to sleep in. I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and go to kollel. That's what he said he was going to do. He set the alarm for 5 a.m. And he woke up at 5 a.m. and he says, you know what? He heard a voice that said, go back to bed. Sheva brachas, go back to bed. He says, oh, I know you. You're the yetzer hara. Get out of here. And he was about to get out of bed. And then he heard another voice saying, come on, start your new life. Sheva brachas is perfect time to get up at 5 a.m. He says, I know you. You're the yetzer tov. I'm going to listen to you. But then he heard that first voice come back, and it said, hold on a second. You're going to disturb your wife. Come on. You're chosin day melech. You're like a king. You got to sleep in a little. It's okay. You'll wake up before Seifrim Krishma. He's like, oh, that sounds very reasonable. Hold on. I think this is the yetzer hara. And then another voice came and he said, come on, you got to get up. And however you start your new life, this is how it's going to be for forever. He says, yeah, that's the yetzer tov. And he said they were going back and forth with the yetzer hara, yetzer tov, yetzer hara, yetzer tov. And each one would say such a good argument. The other one would have a counter argument. And they were arguing back and forth. I want to tell you, though, in the end, you know who won? Yetzer tov won. It took him 5 hours, but he won in the end. It took him 5 hours, but he won in the end.
10 a.m.
Yetzer tov won. By 10 a.m., the yetzer tov won.
Very nice.
Okay. So, the yetzer hara is a shofet. He says his opinion. And the yetzer tov is a shofet. He says his opinion. Okay, we have a stalemate. V'tzarech la'achriya b'neihem. You have to reconcile between the two. V'halacha k'divrei ha'mechriya. And then the ruling is going to be according to the tiebreaker. So the evil inclination says his opinion in the left ventricle of the heart. And then from the left ventricle of the heart, that thought goes up to the brain to think about it. And immediately, as soon as it gets there, the second judge disputes it. Who's the second judge? That's the godly soul which is in his brain. And like we learn in chapter 9, that the place, the location of the yetzer tov is both the brain, but also then it's like colony is the right ventricle of the heart. So now you have the yetzer hara coming up from the left ventricle of the heart, going up to the brain to try to be mahar in its impulse. And then you have the yetzer tov countering from the brain and going down to the right ventricle of the heart. And we're in a stalemate. And what are we going to do? The halacha, the final ruling, will be like the tiebreaker. Who's the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ha'ezer la'yetzer tov. Yeah, you know, that Kadosh Baruch Hu's always, he's got his favorites. So, yeah, you're always taking his side. Yes, that's true. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to take the side of the yetzer tov. So when we need to have a tiebreaker, very conveniently, Baruch Hashem. Now, if you don't put up any resistance, so then the tiebreaker doesn't help. But if you're stuck in a stalemate, the tiebreaker is going to come break the tie. Yeah.
Are we just describing the inner conflict right now?
Yes. As opposed to?
As opposed to like moving forward to another topic.
Oh, you're asking, is this telling us what to do, or is it just describing us?
This is what we ended off with last week, that the Beinoni externally in the garden is perfect, but there's an internal conflict, so now we're just delving into these.
Okay, yes, it's correct. Basically, what we said last week, the condition that we described last week, we are now describing the inner mechanics of what is occurring. Because we said, sort of in a very general way, that last week in chapter 12, that the Beinoni is never going to listen to the yetzer hara. Okay, but that's the end result. What's behind the scenes? So now we're describing the behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, there's one shofet says his idea or his opinion. Another shofet says his opinion. And then Hashem comes in as the tiebreaker between them. Yeah, exactly.
So if one listens to the shofet of the hara,
yeah,
that's from Hashem.
If somebody listens to the shofet of the yetzer hara, then Hashem doesn't even have a chance to come and break the tie. He didn't give it a tie-breaking situation.
So Hashem only steps in if it's equal.
Right, you do your part.
They both have good reason to close.
The yetzer hara never has good reasons.
So when does Hashem step in?
When you resist. He can only come in and break up a tie. If you roll over and you just go and do whatever the yetzer hara wants, Hashem doesn't, what can he do there? You have free choice.
So what do you mean when it's a tie?
When it's a tie doesn't mean objectively that they both have equally valid arguments. A tie means where you are giving pushback to the yetzer hara. The yetzer hara comes to you and says, do this. And you say, okay, well then, Hashem's not getting involved. He gave you free choice. Okay? But let's say the yetzer hara comes to you and says, hey, I got an idea. And you counter that from your yetzer tov and say, no. Oh, well now we're in a deadlock. What are we going to do? So then Hashem comes in and breaks the tie by saying, let's go with the yetzer tov. You have to create the stalemate by resisting the yetzer hara. If you don't resist the yetzer hara, there's no tie to break.
Well, once you resist the yetzer hara, isn't there no tie? Haven't you resisted?
Well, no, that's the whole point he's making. On your own, you would not be able to resolve this situation. You'd be stuck forever. It's because Hashem's going to come in and give a boost to the yetzer tov that the situation will get resolved favorably.
Only once you resist.
But only once you resist it, correct.
I mean, resist and Hashem will then support you.
That's right. You take the first step and Hashem will have your back. Right.
Is that always the case, or Hashem always lets you?
Hashem always, yes. Now, can I say that the mechanics that are described here about the Beinoni would also apply to the Rasha when the Rasha chooses to fight the fight? The only thing is the Rasha doesn't always fight the fight. So Hashem can't come in and take your side if you haven't yourself taken a side.
Well, if the Russia came in and decided to take the side of the yetzer hara, does Hashem come in? Still
No, you have free choice.
What?
No, if you
He's not going to change it. He's only there if you have to make a decision between the two. But once you're leaning already to that side, he doesn't come in to try and dissuade you?
No, you have free choice. Okay. So you're asking, are we able to finish this and resolve this on our own? And listen to what the Alter Rebbe says. He quotes the Gemara here. Kamaimir Rizal. Ilamole Kadosh Baruch Hu Ezrei, if Hashem wouldn't come to his assistance, the person's assistance, in Yachalai, he would not be able to overcome the yetzer hara.
Really?
Yeah. If you would not have divine assistance, you would never be able to overcome the temptation. Hashem created the yetzer hara so well. He designed it to be so effective at what it does that it is insurmountably resistant. You cannot overcome it on your own. On your own. Underline the words on your own.
What about
That's not overcoming it. The first step isn't overcoming it. You cannot win this on your own.
Interesting. Because he's not a tzaddik.
Let me say it like this. There is no secular humanistic model of Tanya. With all of Tanya's impulse control and what people try to say, oh, this is CBT, and all of that, there is an inherently spiritual and theistic foundation of the entire model, which is that ultimately your impulse control only is favorably resolving the conflict because of a godly assistance. So you can only get it so far. You can't finish the job on your own. Okay, this is not just you can do this, you've got it, just say no, just resist. Yeah, I would like to do that, but my human power on its own is insufficient to overcome my own yetzer hara. I need Hashem. Yeah?
We can't blame humans for not. Then we should turn to Hashem and say, where have you been?
Well, so now you want to say, and I like that, it's very Jewish to say, well then, how can we blame anyone for any sin? Because really, it's Hashem. He should have stepped in. When one little kid is smacking another little kid, where's the mora? Where's the mommy? Where's the tati? Where's the adult to come break it up, right? So, and I like that. It's very Jewish to hold Hashem accountable. But I want to answer and say, you know what? If you resist, Hashem will step in. It's where you didn't resist, and then what do you want Hashem to do? So, look, on one hand, we cannot overcome the yetzer hara on our own. There's zero chance of doing it on our own. There's no secular humanistic parallel model for this. We can't do it on our own. On the other hand, Hashem, quote unquote, can't be the machriya or the tiebreaker unless you give him a tie to work with, which means that you resist. So we're sort of dependent on each other in this situation. We've got to resist, and then Hashem's got to come in and make the difference, push us over the edge. But what does it mean when the Gemara says, if not for Hashem's assistance, we would never be able to overcome the yetzer hara? This is what it means. Yeah?
We do resist sometimes, and we still do it.
What?
Sometimes we do resist, and we try to resist, and we still do it.
We do resist.
Do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't it have to be equivalent to the
Yeah. So the question is, but we do resist.
Because we're not a Beinoni. I think.
What does it mean to resist, and how much do we need to resist in order for Hashem to step in?
What does it mean to resist, and how much do we have to resist in order for Hashem to step in? These are the questions that are on the table right now. Or how about, I change the question to, how often do you have to resist? Because I think that's a more helpful way of phrasing it.
And the more you do it,
Well, what I had in mind is this. I may be able to resist and overcome in this moment. But what happens if the same exact temptation persistently returns? And after the 10th time, I just get worn down and I tell the telemarketer, fine, whatever, okay, right? Because I'm just exhausted.
Yeah.
So what am I going to argue later? But I told him no 10 times. Or I told him no 9 times. And the 10th time, I just didn't have koyach left. So you're saying sometimes we resist and it doesn't work. Not really true. What happens is we stop resisting. We get tired of it. And one of the things you have to realize about the Beinoni is that he's committed to this grind. The Beinoni is going to engage. You think that the Beinoni resists one time in the morning and then it's like, oh, now it's smooth sailing until tomorrow? We said yesterday The only time it's smooth sailing is in the middle of his davening, and then immediately after he finishes davening, he's being beset by all this internal conflict. And it doesn't mean once, it doesn't mean twice, it could mean every single second. And all you have to do is let your guard down once, and you're no longer a Beinoni. So you ask, how much does he resist? My answer is how often? And the answer is every time.
Wow.
100% of the time. Yeah, well, that's the intensity of the Beinoni, is the constancy of it. Yes. Yes. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit more specifically about the form that this divine assistance comes in. This presence of God which breaks the tie. Is it like a beam of light shines down and all of a sudden... Yeah, okay. So he explains what it is. V'ho'ezer, and the divine assistance. He hara shamea er Hashem al nefesh halakis. It is the divine emanation that shines godly light onto the godly soul. Lies la yisven shlita al sichlos haksil v'yetzer hara, to give it a one-up, to give it an edge over the foolishness of the foolish yetzer hara. Like the advantage of light over dark as mentioned above. Remember last week we spoke about our metaphor of light and dark? That the way in which light replaces darkness is automatic. Yeah. The fact that the yetzer toiv and the nefesh halakis are able to displace the foolishness of the yetzer hara and nefesh bamis in the manner in which they do can only be attributed to this divine property endowed within them. In other words, the yetzer toiv is not just doing God's work, it's also been endowed with a certain godly property, which is what we call the hara of Oir Hashem, which is Meir, which gives it this special advantage of light over dark. What we mean to say is the way that, we'll call it the Oir, the spiritual light, functions, is it has different properties. It functions differently than the spiritual chayshech, the spiritual darkness. In other words, it's not really an even fight. It's not like two equal and opposite forces opposing each other. The yetzer toiv functions in a way completely differently than the yetzer hara functions, just as light functions completely differently than darkness functions. And the upshot of that, let's go with the mashal, the upshot of the difference between how light functions than how darkness functions is, or at least one practical outcome of that is, how the manner in which light automatically replaces darkness. It's not an even fight. They're not really mirror images of each other that are engaged or embroiled with each other. The nature of the nefesh halakis is that it's how do I put this? It's not just, okay, when the two are fighting, you have two boxers who are boxing each other and they're totally equally matched. But then, the fix is in because the guy who owns the venue, he likes one fighter more than the other one. So when there's about to be a tie, as inevitably there's going to be a tie because they're totally evenly matched, so then the owner of Caesar's Palace comes in and smashes a folding chair over one guy's back. That's a little WWF action there. No, that's not what happens. That's not the correct way to envision it. Think about it like this. The yetzer hara and the yetzer toiv are fundamentally different in the way that they function, so that when they do square off against each other, there's something inherently different about the yetzer tov, which gives it a fundamental advantage over the yetzer hara, which is best likened to the way that light deals with darkness. It's not like you have, like where I was talking about last week, that you have, I gave you the HVAC mashal. You have a bunch of hot air in the room and you need to replace it with cold air. So you got to move out the hot air to move in the cold air. Remember I was talking about this last week, about air conditioning? Yeah? All right. But when you have light, it's not like, oh, you got to move out the darkness so you can move in the light. That's not how it works. Once you move in the light, the darkness is gone. Now, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, you may have to do that repeatedly, but at least in the moment, that's the nature of how light functions, and that's the best way, albeit metaphorically, to describe the inherent advantage that Hashem is giving the yetzer tov. That once the yetzer tov asserts itself, it automatically displaces the yetzer hara, at least for that moment.
So what makes us then go back to the yetzer hara? Like if we're in yetzer tov land and it's asserting.
It's a rematch.
What part of us?
It's a rematch. So you won that one. Now there's another one.
So we're always being challenged.
Yeah. The point is not to be free of the challenge, because you're going to be challenged and re-challenged. The point is to know that at any given moment when you are being challenged, you have to know that it's not a fair fight in a good way. In a good way. It's not a fair fight in a good way. That if you resist with your yetzer tov against your yetzer hara, your yetzer tov has an inherent advantage over the yetzer hara.
What does it mean to resist? What does that mean? Like just tap into that energy of the yetzer tov?
Well, on a very simple level, he's just talking about being aware. Just being conscious of these two voices. I mean, a lot of early Tanya is just about identifying who's talking to me. You know, we tend to, in our pre-Tanya condition, assume that all internal voices are coming from the same place. And when you start learning a little bit of Tanya, even these early chapters, one thing that becomes very clear is not every internal voice that sounds like my voice and uses my own logic against me, for me or against me, depending who it is, not every voice that's going on inside my head is coming from the same place and has the same agenda. So a big part of this is just being aware.
So how do we identify if it's like the will of Hashem that means?
Well, there's some open and shut cases are pretty black and white. So the voice that comes and tells you to go do an aveda, I don't have to like, hey, let's go look into that. Maybe that's the yetzer hara. No, that was the yetzer hara. Like, that's pretty obvious. Then there are more like expert level pro tips, because sometimes, like the Hayemi Mechav Gimel Sivan talks about, sometimes the Nefesh Bahamas will dress up like a chassid and tell you to do mitzvahs, because he knows if they'll tell you to do an aveda, you won't listen. So they'll tell you to do mitzvahs, but they'll tell you to do mitzvahs that are not essential to your purpose in life in order to get you off the track. But that's expert level. Let's not get into that right now. Yeah.
So the way the yetzer hara and yetzer tov operate for the Beinoni, and the rest of us are probably Russia, the Tov. I mean, is it the same system for us, the rest of us?
The way it operates is the same for everybody. That's not different. I mentioned that earlier. I'll say it again. These mechanics are not unique to the Beinoni. What's unique about the Beinoni is that he exercises it flawlessly. But when anybody makes the right choice, this is what happens. Okay. So he immediately displaces the spiritual darkness with spiritual light. Ach, me'acher sha'arasha b'chol ha'smali b'beinihu b'takfei ketil dosei, l'shavis taivus l'chol tainu ge'elam hazeh. However, since the negativity in the left ventricle of the heart is still in its full strength, it hasn't gotten weakened over the years, it's still vibrant, still very robust, and it still desires all types of physical worldly pleasure. It hasn't become nullified. It hasn't been dislodged whatsoever. The only thing is it doesn't have any power to spread itself out into the limbs, meaning on an emotional level, the Nefesh Habahamis is very active and very vocal. It just doesn't get to carry out its will into actual behaviors. Why? Because Hashem is taking the side, is standing behind the pauper. The pauper is the Nefesh Elokis, and assisting him. Lochei nikra kirasha. Therefore, this persona is labeled as kirasha, with a chaf hadimyan, like a rasha. He's not a rasha, he's a Beinoni. But he's like a rasha in as much as his internal struggle is identical to that of the rasha. The outcome is different than the rasha's outcome, but the internal struggle is the same. Kamay mirazal, afilu kol ha'elam kulei min mluchot tzadikato, hayabe'enecha kerasha. Remember in chapter 1, very beginning, the first few lines. What do? The whole world tells you you're a tzaddik. Say, no, I'm not a tzaddik. You should be in your eyes like a rasha. He says, yeah, like a rasha. V'lei rasha mamish, not literally a rasha. Like a rasha. So that one little letter makes a huge difference. Now we've answered one of the big early questions in Tanya. Remember in the very beginning of Tanya, we said, hold on a second. The Gemara says, if everyone tells you you're a tzaddik, say no. I'm not a tzaddik. I should think of myself in my own eyes as a rasha. So he says, it doesn't mean as a rasha. Think of yourself that you are a rasha. It means similar to a rasha. In what respect? Internally, I've got the same impulses as a rasha. And furthermore, like he says here, I shouldn't fool myself to think that those impulses have waned. Let me ask you a question. Because the Beinoni has had flawless behavior for a year, for 10 years, for 50 years, you think that makes his animal soul weaker? No, not at all. Not at all. He's still kirasha. Internally, he's still grappling with the same stuff that the rasha grapples with.
He's not really grappling. It's just that you're machshava. A momentary thought that he manages to push away. So much so that even his machshava is not sullied.
But that's what grappling means.
That's a big fight.
That's a big fight. Let's not minimize it. Let's not.
I thought it's not a fight. I thought it's not.
It's a huge fight. It's a huge struggle.
I thought it's just a momentary thought that he manages to immediately push away.
A momentary thought that comes every moment.
Doing it all day. Exhausted.
This nudnik, yeah, it is exhausting. It can be exhausting. Yeah, it can be exhausting.
Okay, that's not the
Yeah.
impression I had.
It's like a recovering addict who has to surrender to a higher power. They say an addict is never not an addict even when they stop using. It's every single day.
Right. So it's a very good comparison in many ways. Maybe not 100% consistent, but in a lot of ways. And one of the things you're saying is, the higher power thing. Like we were just saying, the fact that I'm able to make the right choices consistently and maintain status as a Beinoni, not because I'm so strong. No. And it's not because my disease is less strong. No.
And he had to take the first step.
And he had to take the first step, right? And then Hashem comes in and does what we cannot do for ourselves. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's very important, this idea that You mentioned recovery as a muscle. I've heard guys say, while I'm sitting here in the meeting getting sober, my disease is out in the parking lot doing push-ups. Right? So, or I heard a guy once say that, you know what sobriety is? It's like you turn a stereo to full blast, and then you unplug it, and then you come back a year later and plug it back in. It's right back to full blast. So don't think that because you have recovery for a year, for 10 years, for whatever it is, so the problem went away. No, that's called being a tzaddik. Halavai. That would be beautiful. But that's not what happened. What happened is you are doing the things you need to do to be able to consistently make the choices that you can make, and then Hashem comes in and makes it successful. But and without Hashem, it's impossible. But it's that partnership. I have to make the right choices. If I don't consistently do the things that I have to do, even with all of Hashem's help, this whole thing falls apart. So, yeah.
The yetzer hara and the yetzer tov, is that in the animal soul? Because the godly soul doesn't have a yetzer hara.
Well, okay. So for practical purposes here, we're going to use the terms yetzer tov and nefesh elokis synonymously, and we're going to use the terms yetzer hara and nefesh abamis synonymously. In other words, you can speak about yetzer hara and yetzer tov, or you can speak about nefesh abamis, nefesh elokis. But for practical purposes here, if you want to be more technical, they're not synonymous. But for practical purposes here, they're synonymous.
They're really not synonymous. Because the godly soul is connected to Hashem, it's part of Hashem.
Right.
And it's perfect. The animal soul is beset by all these struggles.
Okay, no, here, let me correct your thinking. Your nefesh abamis isn't being attacked or tempted. You, who's you? That's a whole other discussion. You have a nefesh abamis and a nefesh elokis, and they're fighting over you. Who are you? Let's just say, in the terms that we're already familiar with, chapter 9, you're the small city. Okay? So it's not that you are one king or the other. It's that the two kings are fighting over you.
To get
Behavioral control.
and to get like superiority. One of them is going to
Superiority means behavioral control.
So at tzaddik, how does the tzaddik look in that scenario?
So the tzaddik that we learned about in chapter 10, he also has two kings, but the king who normally ruins your life has either disappeared, he retired, he's gone, or he actually became best friends with the good king and carries out his agenda.
So the light in that case overwhelmed the darkness of the bad king.
So in the case of the tzaddik, the yisna oyer min ha-choshech, the advantage of the light over the dark, has even exerted itself on the emotional and cognitive levels, where he only has holy emotions and holy thought processes. In the case of the Beinoni, that advantage has only exerted itself as far as behavior.
So the tzaddik is in this world
Yeah, sure.
to lift the sparks.
What the function of the tzaddik is, we're not so. It's not so pertinent to our discussion.
Well, it kind of is, because then what is the point of being the tzaddik?
Yeah, I don't know.
Tzaddik has to be
I don't know. It's Sefer Shel Beinim. We don't really find out the point of being a tzaddik in this book.
Is the tzaddik here to save us? That's why they're 36
No,
righteous people
no.
in the world?
I don't know. This book doesn't tell me the purpose of tzaddikim. The book only mentions a tzaddik to give me a range, just for context purposes. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Let me correct myself. There's one place where it clearly, and now I'm thinking of a second place, where it tells me the role of a tzaddik in my life. First place is in Perek Beis, about the connection to the tzaddik. And then also in the next chapter, in chapter 14, in Perek Yud Daled, it tells me that if I do everything I'm supposed to do, I could become spiritually impregnated with the ruach of a tzaddik. And it would, yeah, okay, yeah, they're here to help us, sure, okay. Sure, yes. You're right.
Whatever works for you. Like that from years of practicing this internal struggle.
The tzaddik?
Right.
No, they're just a different category. Okay. So listen to this. We just said that this Beinoni is not a Rasha, but he's ki Rasha. He's like a Rasha. V'lei Rasha mamish, not literally a Rasha. God forbid. Ella sheyachzik atzmei lebeinoni. Rather, he should hold himself to be a Beinoni. V'lei lahaymin laha'elam sha'emin sha'rasha beiniz batel legabi atev shazu medregas tzaddik. He shouldn't listen to everyone who tells him that his ra became nullified to his toiv, because that's a description of a tzaddik. So remember in the very beginning of Perek Aleph, we said that even if the whole world tells you tzaddik ato, you are a tzaddik, don't listen to them. Why not? Because you should know, yeah, this perfect behavior that the world is seeing, and they're assuming that this is I roll out of bed in the morning and I behave like this without any struggle. That's why they think I'm a tzaddik. But I'm not under those under that misimpression. I know that my behaviors are tzaddik-like, but internally there's a lot of struggle that goes into maintaining that. Ella, rather.
And if there's so much struggle, how is the machshava also not sinning? Do you understand? Remember we said there's 3 levushim. Machshava, Dibur, and a Beinoni is on all 3 levels.
But just because he doesn't I understand the question you're asking, similar to what you're asking a few minutes ago. Let me just try to clarify. When we say that the Beinoni is free from sinful thought, we don't mean to imply in any way that he's free from the impulse for sinful thought. That's why I love that story about Reb Zev of Zhitomer, about the knock at the door. Please imagine, well, if you love the story, please imagine that the knock is going on 24/7, and it doesn't stop, and it goes for years.
But you don't open the door.
Okay.
But he's got to resist.
You don't open the
But
door.
imagine there's a knock that doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. You wake up at 3 a.m. and it's still going. He's still knocking. You go on a vacation, it sounds like torture.
It sounds like hell. Remember
Yeah.
we discussed hell? That's what it sounds like, that little guy.
That
who's
distraction,
going through
yeah.
distraction all day.
Yeah.
Don't we
11
all
months.
have that? Don't we all have that? Except some of us succumb and the Beinoni does not succumb. So we all have that internal fight going on all the time.
Well, I don't think it's consistent. I think there are fluctuations. There are times when the knock is louder and times when the knock is quieter, times when the knock is more frequent, sometimes when it's less frequent. But what we're describing here, a Beinoni could very well be somebody who's constantly having that bid. I call it a bid. The yetzer hara is making a bid. Hey, can we think about this? Hey, can we think about this? Hey, can we think about this? You ever take little kids to the grocery store and they ask if they can buy candy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so sometimes you say no, and that's it. Sometimes it's an ongoing, even after you left the grocery store. Can we go back and get no?
Sometimes you buy it.
And sometimes you buy it, and then you're a Rasha, you're not a Beinoni. Right. Beinoni never buys the candy. I'll buy the candy when I want to buy the candy, not when you tell me to buy the candy.
Aren't there behavioral strategies we can utilize to set ourselves up for success so that we don't have this internal struggle time?
You're asking a question, which is an inevitable question, which is, I'm going to repeat your words, aren't there strategies we can put into place that would minimize the amount of struggle required? And the answer to your question is absolutely there are, and we will need to ask this question and answer this question at some point. 100%. At this point, we're simply learning our first tool, Mayach Shal Dalalev, exert the inherent dominance of the mind over the heart in order to have perfect impulse control. Now, you're 100% right. at some point, I would appreciate a strategy for mitigating the degree of impulse control that's going to be required.
Which we must already be all utilizing to some degree.
Yeah, okay. But just so we'll keep you engaged here, that's going to be the question in Perek Tes Zayin and Yud Zayin. And then we're going to return to it in Prokim Mem Aleph through Nun.
We have to get there first.
But we have to get there. Right. Okay. Yes. All right. So let's continue here. So he shouldn't believe that he's a tzaddik, even if the whole world tells him he's a tzaddik. Ella, rather, be'einav ki'ilu mahus v'atzmus shalarahu b'takvei gvurase b'chol asmalu k'toldase. He should realize that the negativity in his heart is just as strong as the day he was born. It did not leave. Don't fool yourself, even if you're flawless in your behavioral control. Actually, to the contrary, nischazik yeser behemshich hazman shnishtamesh beharba bechilo shtia ushar nyone elam hazeh. His nefesh habamis actually got stronger over the years because he's been using it for his biological survival, like eating and drinking and other bodily things, which are unavoidable. It's unavoidable that the Beinoni is going to have to hold on to his nefesh habamis, because that's what's going to maintain his physical survival of his body. So here's the crazy thing: you have this Beinoni who's been flawlessly managing the behavioral struggle for years or for decades, and you ask, well, after all this time, I would assume now your nefesh habamis has atrophied. Maybe he's weaker. Maybe he's given up. And the reality is, no, actually, my nefesh habamis is even stronger today than when I started struggling against him. Well, if he's even stronger, then how are you still able to maintain being a Beinoni? Well,
God.
First of all, yeah, God is helping me, yeah. But also I'm stronger. So he's stronger and I'm stronger. Which is why, if you're not going up, you're going down. Like running up the down escalator. Because the animal soul is going to get stronger over time. And that's in the best case scenario, where a person's a Beinoni and has perfect impulse control, and the animal soul is getting stronger over the years. Imagine the person who's indulging the animal soul by taking behavioral missteps. So the important idea here is the identity of the Beinoni. He has to know who he is. He has to understand that the image that the world sees is one thing, and that's within his power, and that's why the whole focus is on that, on the behaviors. But that's just the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Behind all of that, he's Ki Rasha. He's exactly like the Rasha. Let's see how far we can go. Maybe a few more lines. Let's go maybe a few more lines. Va'af mi sheteres Hashem cheftzeh v'yega bo yema v'layla lishma. Even somebody who his sole desire is to learn Torah and he meditates upon Torah day and night, that is not a proof whatsoever that he's gotten rid of the Ra. You look at the guy, he's a masmid bilimudei. The guy doesn't do anything but sit and learn Torah all day. He must be a tzaddik. Maybe, but the fact that he sits and learns Torah all day is not the proof of that. In fact, I think you're beginning to catch on. There's absolutely no external proof that anyone's a tzaddik. So he's sitting and learning Torah all day. He must be a tzaddik. No, not necessarily. Ela yachal yes, rather, what's possible? That the essence, meaning the inner, emotional, cognitive traits of the animal soul are just as strong as ever. Rak shelavushav. It's just on the level of the levushim, thought, speech, and action. Shem machshava dibur ha'maisa shel nefesh ba'amis einon mislabshim b'meich v'hapev yadayim mishar evrei aguf. The soul garments don't get a chance to express themselves in his brain, in his mouth, in his hands, in his other limbs. Why not? Hashem because Hashem has given power of the mind over the heart, and that's why the godly soul is able to maintain, in the case of the Beinoni, perfect control over the small city, which is the body. Shia levush umerkava l'shleish levusha sheslabsha bohem. That the end result is that the person is exclusively a garment or a vehicle for the thought, speech, and action of Torah mitzvahs. But the inner essence, again, the thought, speech, and action are under control, but the cognition and the emotions are not. Only at those rare moments where there's this intense revelation of love, at these special times, like, for instance, we said, when he davens. And even at those times, it's still having to hold it back. It's not like, we'll put down our weapons and we won't get slaughtered. No, if we put down our weapons, we are going to get slaughtered. When one goes up, the other goes down. When one goes down, the other goes up. B'gedulas Hashem ein zav baruch hu lahelid ava azah la Hashem k'dish bi eish b'chol yomani shebelibei v'oz yiskaf yisiter acher shebechol smali. Rather, what happens is when you're in that mode of bina, of meditation, of his bonus, and it creates a fiery love for Hashem, so that momentarily displaces, even on the internal emotional level, any negative emotions. But that ra is not batal in the Beinoni, only in the tzaddik, where it says, my heart, meaning the negative emotions of the heart, are dead within me. So the tzaddik actually detests ra, either completely or incompletely. Remember, those are the two levels of tzaddik that we mentioned in chapter 10. But by a Beinoni, even at the times of respite, it's like a sleeping guy. Don't poke the bear, right? He's just sleeping. It's like it's sleeping in his left ventricle. At the times when he's davening or saying Shema and the love is burning. And then, right afterwards, boom, comes flooding back. So you should know, even in the times when the Beinoni has this respite, where even on an internal level, his emotions are consistently holy and pure, all the way 100%. Yeah, but that's a temporary condition that can be lost in an instant, and then all that other stuff will come back, and then the emotional conflict will return. Now, the behavioral conflict is always going to be 100%. He's always going to be flawless in that area. But emotionally, to be free from the distraction, that only happens at special times, like when he's very deep in prayer. Okay?
He has momentary, overwhelming feelings
Right. He has overwhelming feelings of love for Hashem. So they're so overwhelming that it's as if everything else is gone. But it's just sleeping. Okay. We're going to stop there. We're going to continue next week, and Yetzer Hashem finish Perek Yud Gimel, and then I think we're going to break for Pesach. I think next week is our last class before Pesach. So, God willing, we'll finish Perek Yud Gimel next week.